Entering sales in the late 1980s, the Lotus Elan M100 proved to be among the finest small roadsters to enter the market, an unusual revival for the Lotus firm after years of quiet operation as it strove to fight off bankruptcy over the course of the decade. However, the launch of the M100 was both extremely coincidental but ill-timed, as alongside its release in 1989 came the Mazda MX-5, a small roadster of similar size and performance that almost single-handedly revived the concept of lightweight sports roadsters on the global market, with its meteoric rise leaving the little Lotus firmly in the shadows. The Lotus Elan takes its name from the original series of sports cars from the 1960s and early 70s, Lotus and its founder Colin Chapman having developed a strong reputation for building potent, lightweight sports cars and racing cars by the turn of that decade, as well as being a force to be reckoned with in both sports car racing and Formula One. From a slew of highly successful racers, Chapman opted to move into the realm of production sports cars with the diminutive Lotus 7 and the fiberglass monocoque Lotus Elite, the Elite proving to be a challenge to build due to a lack of torsional rigidity alongside other teething problems, which made it a difficult car to manage for eventual customers. Based on his experience with the Elite, and as the trend for British roadsters began to dominate the global market, with machines such as the MGB and the Austin Healey Sprite, the all-new Lotus Elan would be launched in 1962 as the company's first product to use a steel backbone chassis that would lend some stiffness to the fiberglass body. Front suspension was a twin A-arm style with coil springs and shock absorbers, while Chapman's own strut layout was fitted to the rear, this being complemented with a 4-speed manual gearbox and rear differential that were derived from modified Ford components as per the engine, the original Elan of 1962 weighing in at just 1,500 pounds, though later versions would see their weight slowly increase. Initially, the Elan came as the 1500 convertible with a 1.5-litre Ford engine, modified to include a Coventry Climax dual overhead cam cylinder head, though this was rapidly superseded by the 1.6-litre Elan 1600, while 1964 saw the arrival of the updated Elan S2, followed in 1965 by factory-built coupes. In 1966 and 1968 respectively, the Elan S3 and S4 entered sales, followed by the Elan Sprint as the final development of the car, which was produced from 1970 to December 1972. Elan SE variants also being available through most of the car's production and offered additional power. Alongside the regular Elan was the Lotus Elan Plus 2, which entered production in 1967 as a version so thoroughly revised that it could almost be considered a different car in its own right, this machine being a 2+2 coupe with a lengthened wheelbase, reinforced sills, widened track, and larger dimensions all around. The Plus 2 proved to be a more practical and luxurious version of the Elan, though all this came at the cost of the car's nippy performance, as total weight was pushed to 2,000 pounds, the original version being followed in 1968 by the Plus 2S, which featured an upgraded cabin. 1971 would see the release of the Plus 2S 130, which was fitted with the 126 horsepower, 1.6-litre big valve engine from the Lotus Elan Sprint, the car being initially launched with the original 4-speed gearbox until a 5-speed one was sourced soon after, and would carry on the Elan name until production ended in 1975. By the mid-1970s, the Elan was clearly a product of the previous decade's trend for low-slung, perky open-top British sports cars, which, in the face of American legislation threatening the banning of convertibles, and as the wedge-shaped profile of the iconic Lamborghini Countach took the motoring world by storm, meant the car was heavily outdated, the Elan Plus 2 being replaced in the product lineup by the Angular Elite, while the Elan Roadster and Coupe left sales without a direct successor. From the 1970s and into the 1980s, Lotus would see initial huge success with the launch of the Lotus Esprit sports car, often considered Britain's Ferrari, and a machine that became a cultural milestone due to its appearance in the James Bond franchise, its popularity and significance even rivaling that of the classic Goldfinger Aston Martin DB5, and would feature in The Spy Who Loved Me and For Your Eyes Only. However, from this success came a period when Lotus appeared to be on the brink of complete financial collapse, the impact of the 1979 oil crisis seeing sports car sales fall globally, with Lotus sales figures in the United States dropping from 1,200 in 1980 to a mere 383 in 1981. In an attempt to drum up additional income, Chapman became involved with John DeLorean and his notorious DMC Motor Company of Northern Ireland, with Lotus engineers providing much of the technical and design expertise behind the production of the firm's first and only product, the DMC-12. However, Chapman would succumb to a heart attack in December 1982, just as the scandal surrounding the DeLorean company broke regarding the misappropriation of UK government subsidies to the car builder, of which Chapman was found to be complicit, and thus saw Lotus besieged by inspectors from the British Inland Revenue, who imposed an £84 million legal protective assessment on the company. From here, Lotus faced the possibility of complete collapse into bankruptcy during the 1983 fiscal year, though through the intervention of several major figures in the British car industry, including David Wickens, the founder of British Car Auctions, the firm was rescued at the last minute by injections of funds, with Wickens, as chairman of Lotus, reversing the company's fortunes. Come the mid-1980s, while Lotus had been saved from complete failure, the product lineup for the firm was practically non-existent and comprised only two models: the Lotus Esprit, which continued to hold its own thanks to a major facelift in 1982 to create the Series 3 and the Turbo, and the Lotus XL of 1982, which was essentially a high-level refresh of the earlier Lotus Eclat of 1975. Though the firm had enough money for day-to-day operation, there was not nearly enough capital to allow for a major investment in new products for the model range, and thus, in January 1986, Wickens agreed that the Lotus Company should be bought in its entirety by General Motors of America, and by October of that year, the American builder had procured 91% of the firm for £22.7 million. Prior to the General Motors buyout, Lotus had been in discussions regarding a possible tie-up with Toyota to provide mechanical assistance for the XL, while Oliver Winterbottom, who had been brought back into Lotus following his work developing the TVR Tasman, had begun development in 1981 on a low-end product that would sit beneath the XL and the Esprit as a mass-appeal Lotus car, the intention from the start being to revive the Elan name that had fallen dormant in 1975. However, in the wake of the DeLorean scandal, and with the finances for Lotus reaching their very nadir during 1983, Winterbottom used the opportunity to exploit his alliance with Toyota on the XL as a means to bring the revived Elan to fruition, utilizing Toyota suspension and engines to create a small coupe that garnered an enthusiastic response from the company board. In 1984, the prototype of the car, dubbed the M100, was unveiled and made use of a front-mounted 1.6-litre, 123-horsepower four-cylinder Toyota engine, as well as a Toyota-built 5-speed transmission and final drive, while the suspension utilized the same setup as found on the Lotus XL, though for the purposes of cutting expenditure, the prototype delved into the parts bin of other car companies, with the instrument cluster being carried over from the Opel Monza, the radiator from the Austin Allegro, the rear lights from the Aston Martin Lagonda, and the indicators from the Ford Fiesta. Based on a glass fiber construction, and with the roof being of a two-piece Targa configuration, there was much debate at the time as to whether the M100 design principles had formed the basis of the Toyota MR2 sports car that was launched the same year to huge commercial success. And while the assembly process of the M100 did indeed have an influence on the MR2, the number of Lotus assets that made it into the Toyota were ultimately limited. At the same time, the M100 was not the first attempt by Lotus to create a replacement car of a similar configuration to the original Elan and Elan Plus 2, Winterbottom having been involved during 1974 in the M80 scheme that sought the creation of a dedicated replacement for both models, and would have been based on the underpinnings of the Eclat. Eventually, the M80 would be scrapped due to budget constraints before it left the concept stage, although the M80 title would be revived briefly on Lotus's unusual venture into the realm of saloon cars, when in 1984, the firm produced the Lotus M80 Eminence, a V8-powered four-door saloon that was built to do battle with the likes of the Aston Martin Lagonda for performance-orientated luxury cars, though this never went beyond a few running prototypes. Back with the M90, the original plan was for Lotus, through its deal with Toyota, to sell the upcoming Elan replacement via Toyota dealerships as a convertible complement to the MR2, being released onto the market as the Lotus Toyota, though in the end, the Japanese builder chose not to partake in the sales and marketing of the upcoming British roadster. Amid the General Motors buyout, work continued on the Elan, which was now codenamed the M100, the general idea behind the car being that it would be a mass-market roadster that would appeal to American buyers, and thus Lotus expended great effort into testing the machine over a 2-year period, with 19 crashed cars and 42 development vehicles being built that clocked up 1 million test miles across various locations, including hot weather trials in the Arizona desert and cold weather trials in the Arctic Circle of Norway. In terms of design, the choice of front-wheel drive was unusual for a sports car of the M100's configuration, and would prove to be the only front-wheel drive model built by Lotus, the rationale being that the fitting of front-wheel drive gave the car incredible controllability when compared to a rear-wheel drive equivalent, though some reviewers would note that its handling was too secure and predictable. For power, the designers continued to shop around for an outsourced engine that could be fitted to the M100, eventually settling on a 1.6-litre double overhead camshaft inline-4 16-valve engine from the Isuzu Gemini family compact, though this was extensively modified by Lotus engineers to increase the power output to 162 horsepower in turbocharged form, with a 0-60 time of 6.5 seconds and a top speed of 137 miles an hour being recorded. Among the modifications made to the Isuzu engine were a new exhaust system, rerouted intake plumbing for better thermodynamic efficiency, improved engine suspension, and major modifications to the engine control unit to improve torque and boost response, while nearly all examples featured an IHI turbocharger. Produced at the Lotus home factory of Hethel in Norfolk, each new car was driven for 30 miles around the company test track in order to note any mechanical or cosmetic failures, while as part of the assessment program, the Elan was also driven for 24 straight hours around the Snetterton circuit at racing speeds. The car would eventually enter sales in November 1989 under 2 variants, the 130 horsepower Elan 1.6 at £17,850 and the 162 horsepower Elan Turbo SE at £19,850, with the General Motors management forecasting a sales rate of 100 cars per month in the marketplace, though unfortunately, this figure proved to be optimistic, as by sheer coincidence, the Lotus Elan M100 had been beaten to customers in February of the same year by the far more affordable Mazda MX-5 of Japan. The Mazda MX-5 had been in development since 1976 and was the product of the company's California design studio, which saw, through customer clinics, a strong demand within the marketplace for the 1960s-era classic British roadster, which, much like the original Elan, comprised a low-slung profile with nippy handling and endearing performance that was perfect for the winding streets of Beverly Hills and the California coast roads. While the classic British sports car had essentially met its end, with such failures as the Triumph TR7 during 1981, the desire for such a machine, especially in the face of a 1960s nostalgic trend during the period, warranted Mazda to approve construction of a new model of generally the same principles during 1986, culminating in the release of the Mazda MX-5 during February 1989. The MX-5, when compared to the Lotus Elan M100, was generally the same in terms of performance and handling, presenting a 0-60 time of 6.7 seconds against the Elan's 6.5, and a top speed of 130 miles an hour against the Elan's 137. However, where the cars differed was in their price, with the base model Elan going on sale at £17,850, while the MX-5 entered the market at £14,249, granting customers what was essentially the same car but without the premium applied to the hand-built assembly of the Lotus. Thus, against a forecast 100 new cars sold per month, the Elan struggled to sell 40, and from its launch in November 1989 and the end of the Series 1 in July 1992, only 3,855 Elans had been constructed, of which only 129 were the cheaper non-turbo editions, while plans to create a dedicated coupe variant of the M100, much like the original Elan, were shelved before they went beyond the concept stage. With the Elan having been completely trounced by the MX-5, and with the car being expensive to build and test, production of the model ended in July 1992. The inability of the Elan M100 to sell in competitive numbers, so as to recoup its huge development costs, being one of several reasons as to General Motors' sale of the Lotus company in August 1993 to ACBN Holdings of Luxembourg, as owned by Romano Artioli, who had also revived the Bugatti firm during the late 1980s. Surprisingly, though, while the Elan M100 had ceased production in July 1992, nearly 2 years after its discontinuation, the car was returned to assembly as a limited edition run of 800 Series 2s, The reason as to this sudden resurrection of the M100 being due to the discovery of surplus Isuzu engines left over from the original production run that were enough to justify the resumption of the model. With only 800 power units available, the Series 2 Elan M100 was specifically to be a limited-run machine available only to the UK market, and was ultimately produced from June 1994 to September 1995. The only differences between the Series 1 and Series 2 being the amendment of the handling to answer some previous concerns, and a reduction of power output to 155 horsepower due to the legislative requirement to fit a catalytic converter on all markets, increasing the 0-60 time from 6.5 to 7.5 seconds. The end of production for the Series 2, however, didn't completely spell the final hurrah for the Elan M100, as during 1995, Lotus, in a bid to drum up some short-term capital, sold the production rights of the car to Kia Motors of South Korea, which produced its own version that was externally almost identical to the original, its most obvious difference being Kia-designed tail lights that replaced the Lotus Elan's Renault Alpine GTA-sourced rear lights. Produced in Ansan, South Korea, between 1996 and 1999, the Kia Elan was sold only on the Korean market, and was fitted with a 151 horsepower, 1.8-litre T8D engine, rather than the Isuzu 1.6 turbocharged unit, though some examples did make it onto the Japanese market, where they were marketed under the name of the Kia Vigato, with total production for the South Korean Elan M100 coming to 1,056 units. In the product lineup, the Elan M100 was replaced as a small convertible by the Lotus Elise, a car that retained a glass fiber body and proved to be one of the best-handling sports cars ever built, its sure-footed performance and exceptional 150-mile-an-hour top speed seeing 35,124 examples produced by the time production ended in 2021. As for the Elan, Lotus announced at the 2010 Paris Motor Show its intention to revive the car for a 2013 production run alongside two other Lotus concepts, the Esprit and Elite revivals, this new Elan being expected to feature a 4-litre V6 engine with around 350 horsepower, thus providing a 0-60 time of 4.5 seconds and a top speed of 165 miles an hour. Other facets of the car would be its exceptional lightness of 2,855 pounds, while also featuring a new kinetic energy recovery system, or KERS, which would provide short bursts of extra passing power through braking. Sadly, the Elan revival, together with the Esprit and the Elite, would remain only a concept, and with Lotus now moving to replace its entire product range, with the exception of the Emira, with electric-powered models, it seems that the classic lineup of its back catalogue are destined not to make a return in the near future. Nevertheless, the Lotus Elan M100 proved to be a car that was able to garner appeal among those who knew of its existence, marrying sure-footed handling with performance and exclusivity that was generally appreciated by those who originally bought one. Unfortunately, the Elan M100 was a victim of bad timing, as with the MX-5 providing a cheaper machine with similar performance and handling, the Lotus was rapidly swamped by the new Pacific Metal, and thus begs the question as to whether the car would have seen far greater success on the market had it entered sales a year before the MX-5 in 1988, rather than becoming an often forgotten obscurity.